The meaning of Romans 8:28. A reflection on God's purpose and His power to bring good from every situation. My dear friends, today we reflect on one of the most comforting and powerful promises found in the entire Bible. It comes from the book of Romans, chapter 8, verse 28. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. These words have brought hope and reassurance to countless people throughout history. During times of uncertainty, difficulty, and pain, this verse reminds believers that God is always working, even when we cannot see it. But to truly understand the depth of this promise, we must look carefully at what the verse is saying. Romans 8:28 does not promise that life will always be easy. It does not say that every moment will be joyful or that hardships will never come. Instead, it gives us something even greater. It promises that God is able to take every circumstance in our lives, both the joyful moments and the painful ones, and weave them together into something meaningful and good. God is always working. The first powerful idea in this verse is the assurance that God is always working. Even when life feels confusing or uncertain, God's work continues behind the scenes. There are moments in life when we cannot understand why certain things happen. Challenges appear unexpectedly. Plans fall apart. We face disappointments that leave us wondering what the future holds. In those moments, it may seem as though everything is out of control. But this verse reminds us that God's hand is still at work. Just as an artist slowly paints a masterpiece one brushstroke at a time, God is shaping our lives with care and intention. Sometimes we see only a small portion of the picture. But God sees the entire canvas. And because He sees the whole story, He is able to bring purpose even out of difficult circumstances. In all things. Another important part of this verse is the phrase "in all things." Notice that it does not say some things. It says all things. This includes the good moments that bring joy and the difficult moments that test our faith. Life is rarely simple or predictable. There are seasons of happiness and seasons of hardship. Yet the promise of Romans 8:28 is that God is able to work through every part of our lives. Even situations that seem painful or confusing can eventually become part of a greater purpose. Throughout the Bible we see many examples of this truth. Joseph, in the book of Genesis, faced betrayal from his own brothers and years of hardship. Yet in the end, God used those events to place Joseph in a position where he could save many lives. Joseph later said these remarkable words, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good." This story illustrates the promise of Romans 8:28 perfectly. God has the power to transform even painful experiences into something meaningful. The good God brings. The verse also tells us that God works all things for good. But what does this good mean? Sometimes people interpret this verse to mean that everything will turn out exactly the way we hope or expect. Yet the good that God brings often goes deeper than temporary comfort. The good God brings is the shaping of our character, the strengthening of our faith, and the growth of our spiritual lives. Difficult experiences often teach us patience, compassion, resilience, and trust. They shape us into people who are wiser and more understanding. The good that God works in our lives is not always immediate or obvious. Sometimes it unfolds slowly over time. But in the end, God's work leads us toward growth, maturity, and a deeper relationship with Him. For those who love God. Romans 8:28 also speaks specifically about those who love God. This promise is connected to a relationship with Him. Loving God means trusting Him, seeking Him, and allowing His guidance to shape our lives. When we walk with God, we begin to see life through the lens of faith. Instead of being overwhelmed by circumstances, we trust that God is guiding our steps. Our love for God becomes the foundation that helps us hold on to hope even when life becomes difficult. Called according to His purpose. The verse also says that this promise is for those who are called according to His purpose. This reminds us that our lives are not random or meaningless. God has a purpose for every person. Each of us has unique gifts, opportunities, and experiences that can be used to bring goodness into the world. Sometimes we may not immediately understand the purpose behind certain events in our lives. But over time, we often begin to see how God has been guiding us all along. What once seemed like a setback may eventually become the very thing that prepares us for something greater. God's purpose unfolds step by step, often in ways we could never have predicted. Trusting God's plan. Romans 8:28 ultimately invites us to trust God's plan. Trust does not mean that we will always understand every situation. It means believing that God's wisdom is greater than our own. Imagine reading only one page from a long and complex story. Without seeing the entire book, it would be difficult to understand how that single page fits into the bigger picture. In the same way, we often see only one small chapter of our lives at a time. But God sees the entire story. He knows how every moment connects to the greater purpose He has for us. Trusting God means believing that even when life feels uncertain, He is still guiding the story towards something good. A message of hope. Romans 8:28 is ultimately a message of hope. It reminds us that no situation is beyond God's ability to redeem. No hardship is too great for His power to transform. Even in moments of pain or confusion, God is still working. This verse encourages us to hold on to faith, knowing that our lives are in the hands of a loving and faithful God. A final reflection. My friends, Romans 8:28 offers a promise that can bring peace to the heart in every season of life. It reminds us that God is always working. He works through joy and through hardship. He works through success and through struggle. And through it all, He is shaping our lives according to His purpose. When we love God and trust His guidance, we can walk forward with confidence, knowing that nothing in our lives is wasted. For in the hands of God, even the most difficult circumstances can become part of a greater story, a story of growth, redemption, and hope. And that is the powerful promise of Romans 8:28.